men are in a box. Men's options are so much narrower than women's. I can work full-time, I can work part-time, I can stay full-time with my kids, and society is fine with all of that. Society is really only fine with men being breadwinners. That has to change too. If women are going to have more power outside of the home, something has to change inside of the home that allows men to have a bit more flexibility.
So joining us now on Open Book is Katty Kay. She's the best-selling author, and she's a US Special Correspondent for BBC News. And Katty, the book is awesome. The title of the book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women, but obviously maximum impact for everybody. I got so much out of your book. And, when we make decisions that are ego-based, as you reference in the book, get ourselves in trouble. Okay. One of my ego-based decisions was to work for Donald Trump, frankly. I wanted to work in the White House. I had, even though my wife probably hated Trump more than Melania hates him and told me don't do it, I had to do it because, ego. So Let's start there. You have Claire Shipman is also your co-author. I think everybody should read this book. Okay. You say men see it as a zero-sum game in the book, which I totally agree with. Women do not see it as a zero-sum game. It's a big thesis of this book. So explain that to us if you don't mind. And welcome to Open Book.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Anthony, and for reading the book, and for your kind words about it. Look, we looked around the world and we thought, hey, if everything was going so well, perhaps we wouldn't need to write a book about power. But I don't know, everything I've seen over the last few years in this country and in other countries made me think that things are not going so well, and perhaps we should start looking at what's happening at the top. And why are there, after all of this billions of dollars that have been spent on diversity programs and all of the efforts that have been made, only 10% of CEOs are women, less than 10% of the world's leaders are women. And, there's so much evidence that if there were more women in positions of power, then things would perhaps be run a little bit better. And we got into looking at this thing of what is power? How do you define it? And it came as a surprise to us that women and men don't see power the same. That men do have this idea of having power over things, right? The traditional idea of power that's come down to us through centuries, from Machiavelli onwards and before him as well, is that you have power. I have power over this cup because I can make it move. I have power over resources, or I have power over people. And the implication is you're making them do something that they don't want to do. It's kind of controlling, it's domineering, it's hierarchical. But according to academics who we interviewed for the book, women understand power differently. They're much more focused on the result. Power to do something. What's the impact you can have with power? What's the why of power? What's the point of having power? And that distinction, I think, explains partly why there are fewer women in positions of power, because we've got this kind of clash of sensibilities, but also what we could achieve. I mean, it's like you do take the ego out of it. When you focus on the result of power, it's not about the big corner office or about your office in the Oval Office, right? Within spitting distance of Donald Trump. It's about what can I do to make my company better? What can I do to improve the lives of my team? What can I do to make my community better or my country better? It's what can I do with power that's important.
So again, I think it's a book for everybody, not just women, because I think when I am in a collaboration mode, when I'm thinking about we and not me versus them, like I know right away when I'm talking to somebody says to me, oh, that person works for me, I know we're going to get into trouble, right? Because at SkyBridge, people work with me. Even though I run the company, they don't work for me. See the distinction? Yeah. But guys get crazy with that sort of stuff. And Margaret Thatcher said in Downing Street years, she wrote in the first volume of her memoirs, that men were more vain than women. She, contrary to what you would think from the stereotype, she found that the members of parliament she interacted with, they were more vain. So not only were they more egocentric, they were more vain. Do you believe that? You think men are more vain than women?
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I mean, because that is about ego, isn't it? I mean, in a way, vanity is ego. It's like, how does the world perceive me? Do I have enough of the trappings that make me look, powerful? Do I have the big office or, the big paycheck or, the team? Do I have a big team under me? And one of the things that got us into writing this book about power was a study that came out of Harvard a couple of years ago that showed that women don't want power. Right? However you define it, women just don't want it. We look at it and we think the cost of getting it is too high. we have to give up too many other things that we want to do in order to get power, but also that power itself is kind of unappealing. And I think that's that vanity element that you're talking about. Is like, why would I give up time with my community, with my family, with my elderly parents, with my friends, to go for, the time I spend on exercise, all of those life values that women have more of than men, according to our research. Why would I give them up to do this, to get this thing that actually, when I get there, it's a lot of mansplaining and egocentricity, and I just don't think I'm going to be able to have much impact with us. And that disturbed us, because if women don't want power, but we think the world would be better off when they have power, when more women have power, we have to think about power. It's not really about changing women, it's about changing power.
My grandmother had a great line about all this. She believed that men, for whatever reason, see themselves as immortal, and even though they're not. You know what I mean? You may remember the movie Moonstruck. Olympia Dukakis said, well, why the hell is Dad having a share? Said, why is Dad having that affair? Well, he thinks the young girl is going to make him live forever. You see what I mean? So there's an egocentrism to the whole thing, which I thought was brilliant. We interviewed Robert Greene, who wrote the best-selling book 48 Laws of Power. It's coming up on its 25th anniversary, and so he's a friend of mine. I brought him on Open Book, and he said something to me. I want to test it on you. I want to get your reaction. He said that, we front ourselves is that we're not like everybody else. We're better. We're better. We have the better angels of human nature, are inspirited in ourselves. It's the other people that are weak and have warped values and so on and so forth. And we present ourselves to the world as being better. But the truth is we're not. We're all roughly the same. We have good and bad in us. And there's this, what Hermann Hesse called it in the book Damien, was the abraxas. There's good and bad in all of us. We try to pretend that there isn't. Do you believe that, Katty? Do you believe what Robert Greene said?
Yeah, I think that's kind of right. I also think we're all sort of average, right? I mean, the idea that I think we go around with this idea that I'm a superstar, I'm better than other people, whether it's morally or professionally. And then actually that gets us into trouble, because we hold ourselves to this standard of having to be constantly the best.
Yes.
And just by the law of averages, right, Anthony? I mean, we cannot all be the best. I mean, it's just, math doesn't work like that. Most of us are just kind of average, and we're kind of muddling through. And I think in a way, particularly, for women who tend to be more perfectionist by nature, according to our research, than men, in a way, recognizing that can almost be sort of liberating. Because if we recognize that we have good and bad in us, it's going to make us more forgiving of other people, and realizing that those weaknesses they have, we have too, right? It's not just you who might have screwed up. I've screwed up as well. Everybody I know has screwed up. But in a way, I think that's sort of liberating. And I think it helps us see people more holistically. One of the things we talked about with power is some of the female leaders we spoke to, one of them had this great idea about you bring your whole self to work, right? People don't leave home in the morning and pop into a phone booth and put on a Superman cape and turn up at the office, even at your office. The person who turns up at your office in the morning, Anthony, is the same person that got out of bed in the morning with all of their foibles and weaknesses and insecurities and problems in their life, whether they are financial or whatever it is, personal. And in a way, if you can accept that and embrace that as a leader, I think it can make your organization work better and have more impact.
I it's very well said, and it's all packed into this book. A couple of things I want to go over, because you're mentioning these women. You interviewed Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
Oh no, we didn't. We referenced her, but we wanted to interview her, but she was right in the middle of.
I'm sorry. It was it one of them? Who did you interview? You interviewed one of these women.
We interviewed a lot of women. We interviewed the first female.
It was a recent one. I remember reading in the book there was a recent leader that you interviewed that I was very impressed with.
We interviewed a woman actually in Senegal who's a leader there. I don't know if that's who you're thinking of.
That's who it was. Tell us about her.
She's so interesting. So we wanted to test the idea of whether power too, when you put it into play out in the real world rather than just in the academic world, actually has an impact. And I was living in Senegal. I kind of took a break in the middle of the Trump campaign. You might understand why I needed to do that, actually, Anthony.
You need a mental health break. Dealing with mental illness, you need a mental health break.
You could have come and joined me. It might have been good for you. Anyway, I went out to Senegal, which is an interesting country because they instituted a law about 10 years ago that meant that any political party that ran for office had to have 50% of its candidates being women. Otherwise, you couldn't run. And suddenly, overnight, a whole load of women went into office, and I interviewed one of them. And I asked her, what does power mean to you? What is it as an idea? And she said, power is the ability to get an electric light into a maternity clinic in a rural area so that the midwife can help a woman give birth with a little bit of electricity.
Very interesting.
Power is getting toilets for girls into schools so they can still go to school when they're having their periods rather than having to stay home. And I just thought, this idea of power as a tool, take out the ego. That is power to change lives. It's an electric light bulb. It's separate toilets for girls. It's about making people's lives better. And I just thought that for me, that was a sort of such an inspirational way of seeing power. It's a tool. It's neutral. You use it for good or for bad. It's a service.
Plus, you write in the book, it's a service-based, service-centrism, as opposed to how does this make me look?
Right.
I'm sitting in the corner office, so I am the man. Okay, and let me tell you how many people work for me. The woman's sitting there saying, okay, I got this office, big deal. What do I got to do now? What's my responsibilities? How do I bear my responsibilities? Talk a little bit about the home power dynamic, okay? About the high-earning woman, she ends up doing more housework than the unemployed man. Isn't
that crazy? Isn't that crazy, but you kind of know it's true?
Well, I know it's true. I haven't lifted a finger. I mean, my mother used to iron my boxer shorts when I was a kid, okay?
My son's
I know we're in this like woke culture now, and I'm supposed to be this like women's liberal and stuff like that. But if your mother's ironing your boxer shorts and you grow up in this Italian patriarchy, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to act?
Yeah, like my husband's dad, who was born in 1914, right, on the eve of the First World War, he wouldn't have known a play date or a lunchbox if it had hit him on the head. He wouldn't have known what a diaper was, right? He didn't have any engagement. So my husband has no role model in his life for organizing play dates, doing the housework, because his dad never did any of that.
Yeah, well,
his mom did it all. And I think that's...
I haven't met your husband, Katty. I already like him, okay? I already like him.
Yeah, except that then he comes along and marries me and suddenly I'm going to shape up. But look, so this was just wonderful that a man in America who doesn't have a job does less housework than a woman who has a full-time job.
And let me ask you this, though, and this is a very honest question, though. Do you feel that sometimes men who have high-powered, high-earning women feel emasculated, that smashes their ego?
So true. I mean, look, It's not just that I feel it. The data is there on this. That couples where the wife earns more than the husband are more likely to get divorced than couples where the husband earns more than the wife. We found in our book this amazing research that a third of American women now earn more than their husbands.
Right.
And the number is growing every year. But in couples where the wife earns more, guess what they do? They lie about it on the US Census form. Because they want to make their marriage look like a so-called traditional marriage.
Right.
They're kind of protecting the guy's ego by saying, he actually earns more than I do. They'll go so far as to lie on a government document in order to kind of maintain this idea. But actually, you know what we concluded from that? First of all, it's crazy, obviously, and it's sad. And we interviewed a guy who quit work and his wife became the primary breadwinner. And he told us that he felt he had failed at the one thing he was meant to achieve, which was being the breadwinner in the family. And we just thought, how sad is that? I mean, actually, the conclusion of this is that men are in a box. Men's options are so much narrower than women's. I can work full-time. I can work part-time. I can stay full-time with my kids. And society is fine with all of that. Society is really only fine with men being breadwinners. Yeah. And I think that has to change too. If women are going to have more power outside of the home, something has to change inside of the home that allows men to have a bit more flexibility.
But, our brains are not that evolved. Okay, so if you really study the brain, it's not that evolved. You have the cortex and then so you're laughing because I'm right about this. The neocortex is literally the size of 6 playing cards. And that's where all the consciousness is. And so the atavism that a man has is quite primordial. He has to be the breadwinner. He's protecting the cave. He's out there hunting. The woman is gathering. people could be mad at me for saying this, but this is why we've evolved the way we've evolved. And now we're becoming more enlightened and we're making more of a transformation. And now because of our society, we're able to be more equal. But women, Katty, didn't get the right to vote in the United States until 1/5 of the 20th century was over.
Yeah.
And then they got the right to vote in the United States. So I think we've made a lot of progress. Am I wrong in saying that? Or
No,
I know it's not perfect, and I know
right.
we haven't gotten to where we should be in terms of where a normative standard would be in a society. But have we made a lot of progress, or am I wrong in saying that?
I'm just wondering if it's the wine bottles and the whiskey bottles that are right over your shoulder that might mean your brain is not working as well as it could be.
Yeah, so you'll notice though, and I'll
I
take
like
this.
that. I like that.
These are all gifts. You'll see they're not open because I
Oh,
actually don't drink.
what a shame. I wish I was with him.
And
Yeah,
you shouldn't trust people that don't drink. So I drink a
I know.
little. You shouldn't ever trust
You're
anybody that doesn't
Italian,
drink.
you're Italian for Italian origin,
I'm
and you don't
Italian,
drink.
but the
Oh,
problem is I just don't like the way it makes me feel. So I
yeah.
don't drink. I drink. If you and I were out to dinner, I'm going to have a drink, but I'm not a teetotaler, but I'm not a big
Right.
drinker. So all these things are gifts. They're like laying around in here,
And no one's
and I hand them out to me. I just got that actually. It's actually some kind of Swiss drink or something.
nice.
But go to what I said. Do you think I'm right about this? That we've
I
had
think
some
we've
progress?
made it's one, half a dozen of one.
Does
And
your husband know how to do play dates, or is he
yeah,
back?
you know what
Yeah, see
happened? So
that
I started earning more
progress?
than my
There's
husband.
progress.
It's totally progress. And so when I started earning more than my husband a kind of few years ago, and I write about it in the book, we had to have some pretty tricky conversations about he had to help more in the house, or my travel schedule might have to take priority because I was the one that was bringing in more money. And they weren't the easiest of conversations to have, even, in a household like mine, where he's been used to me working. And it has kind of changed the dynamic. And I remember actually, but women have to do something here too, right? We have to give up some control over this.
Mm-hmm.
We have to cede some of our domain here, because I remember when my kid's school started putting him as the kind of primary contact to call if there was an emergency at school. And I remember the first time I realized that was happening, feeling sort of displaced, feeling like my role as a mother, and feeling kind of guilty. And then I thought, actually, this is exactly what needs to happen. I have to be able to cede some of that stuff at home
Mm-hmm.
in order for me to be able to carry on doing
What I love about that is what you're saying is so brutally honest, And by the way, because I follow you on Twitter, now known as X. I mean, you've had some, and I hope your mom and dad are still alive. You have some beautiful pictures of your mom and dad that you've showed.
They died actually during COVID, but that's very sweet of you.
Oh, is that right? But I do remember you sitting at a table with them, and you could see their pride in you. And I'm like, all right, this is like a cool family. So but implied in that is that there's some levels of traditionalism that even you, as a very powerful woman, you're just describing it in terms of your displacement, you have to also go through some cognitive awareness and adjustment, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we also have to be, rather than just getting mad that men aren't picking up the vacuum cleaner enough, I think we have to have some empathy. Women have to have more empathy about this kind of narrow box that men are in. I mean, I think of my husband as a sort of sandwich generation. He came from this background where his dad didn't do any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got no role model. And yet suddenly everybody's giving him a hard time if he doesn't do 50% of the housework.
Amen.
But look at the change he's gone through, right? He does pick up our kids from school. He does help with homework. He does organize play dates. And it's easy to focus on all of the stuff that husbands and men aren't doing. We document them in the book, and it'd be great if they step up, but also think how hard it is, that his brain, sometimes I can see it working like, hold on a second, I'm not doing enough, but my dad didn't do any of this, what's my role here? And then I get a hard time if I'm not a full-time dad, but I also get a hard time if I'm not a full-time breadwinner, right? We have to figure that out.
Yeah, no, listen, this is why the book is so interesting. I think the book is relevant to men and women.
You were talking about brain. By the way, you're talking about brains. Did you know that we did a whole chapter on the impact of power on your brains? Like,
that was my next question about power and neuroscience.
It's super cool.
Yeah, so tell us about that, power and neuroscience.
So you were talking about brains and cortexes earlier. What the neuroscientists have found is that people who have power, literally the behavioral activation system in their brain lights up. So power encourages us to take action. which also means that people who have power are more likely to succeed, because we succeed when we do things. People who don't have power, the behavioral activation system kind of shuts down. They're far more passive, far more reticent, less likely to take action. So if you don't have power, you're not likely to succeed, which also, by the way, is why we want the people who have power to be the right people, right? I mean, you know this from your world in politics.
Yeah.
It's all the more reason that that old phrase about power, that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power, Lord Acton, who probably didn't have very many powerful women around to base his research on. But actually, we also found that women who have power do not get corrupted by it. Power tends to corrupt men, but not women. Women who have power are up to 80% less likely to be charged with acts.
More willing to give it up, though, too. You know, Shakespeare didn't write about the women protagonists that were fearful of giving up their power. He wrote about the men that wanted to live forever and not give up their power. But I agree with that. But let me test this on you, because I think this is also relevant. In the Federalist Papers, Hamilton was emphatic about this, and he wrote it anonymously, at least at the time, that men can't handle power. And the reason why we needed to have this diffuse system and the checks and balances, that we actually just can't handle the power, because it does what Acton says. It absolutely corrupts, and it leads to cronyism, and it leads to a split in the society. And by diffusing the power, you make the people more powerful, and you give the people more opportunity. And I think I don't know, what's your reaction to that? Because I feel we're at a point in America now where people, okay, you know, let's give up the democracy. It'll make things more efficient. And by the way, it may for 10 years. Mussolini got the trains to run on time.
Right.
And the Italians were very happy about that. But then the cronyism comes in, and the power craziness happens. And then lo and behold, you know, you have these two-tier systems that crop up, and you get really, really poor people and a few tiny rich people at the top. You know,
well, I mean, look at China right now, right? We have the Chinese economy that's doing badly. The kind of whole social media trend in China at the moment is young Chinese hashtag, they're just going to go and lie down because they feel so apathetic because there are no jobs for them. And what's happened is that Xi Jinping has consolidated power in his own hands. And when you do that, and there's sometimes a risk, I think, of presidents in the United States doing that, of surrounding themselves with yes men and never wanting to hear the bad news. And it's unsustainable as both a political and an economic system. So the economic consequences of Xi Jinping consolidating power have led, I think, to the situation that we're in at the moment, where you have lower growth in China than was projected, just because
100%.
the best decisions are not being made.
But he's also scaring everybody, because if you get on the wrong side of him, remember, that's what happens in a totalitarian regime. I'm a business leader. I think I'm making the right decision for my company, but I'm now on the wrong side of the autocrat, and I disappear, or I'm taken to a re-education camp, or I'm told, and then all of a sudden,
I'm a doctor trying to say there's COVID, there's a pandemic coming.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, more than one cabinet member of the Donald Trump administration has sat in this room, my office, and said to me emphatically that Trump's tweeting froze them, that they were not able to work more closely together for fear if they had done something that he didn't like, he was going to send out a career-ruining tweet. I mean, there's people like me where he's tweeting about I could care less because I'm a New Yorker. But some of these sensitive bureaucrats, they get upset about it, right? And so they stopped working together. You see, and that's a thin membrane of totalitarianism. But you get the point I'm making. This is in the neuroscience, though, am I right? There's the brain is not set up, a male brain, not super set up for lots of power, right? It goes wrong for the man, no?
Well, I think this idea that we have in our research of men, there was a big study done of Fortune 500 companies showing that when men get to the top of organizations, they lose their connection and empathy for those lower down the organizations.
Right.
They stop seeing the problems in the organization as well. That's another thing that happens. So you start putting on rose-tinted glasses. Men start putting on rose-tinted glasses and start thinking that their organization is kind of perfect.
Right.
Maybe because they've got to the top, and so they think any organization that they're at the top at must be perfect.
And by the way, I'm right about everything, so I can run a sports team I
Yeah.
can manage money. I'm right about everything. That's the other thing that
And
I
I don't want to be challenged. And I
right.
don't want to remember the people who are at the bottom who are not
Interesting.
rising up.
Yeah, I think it's another
That's
good point.
and it's interesting that it doesn't happen to women. So women rise up to the C-suite and they don't see the world around them in their corporation with rose-tinted glasses, and they do retain their connection and their empathy to those who are starting out and are at the bottom of the tree. And I
Right.
think that's a kind of interesting dynamic. It's another example of this. And I think it's, it's why there are now a dozen studies that show, global studies, the IMF, the European Union, Goldman
Mm-hmm.
Sachs, Columbia Universities, that companies that employ more women in senior positions make more money than their competitors.
It's interesting.
They
I mean,
do.
it's well said. All right, so I'm at the stage in our podcast where I have 5 words. We come up with 5 words for our
Mhm.
authors, and you could give me a sentence. You could give me a word. I'm going to say the word. I want you to think of something about the word that you think of, and they're all obviously tied to your book. So let's start with the word control, Katty. Control.
Ego.
There you go. Okay, growth.
The ability to see that you're not good at everything, but you can be.
And but also the control of ego, weirdly, right?
Control of
Yeah,
ego.
right, exactly. Okay, female.
Better leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting. Male.
In a box.
Power.
The ability to have an impact and to give us joy. I think that is something that women often forget because they find power kind of intimidating, but that actually there is incredible satisfaction
Yeah,
in having an impact and making people's lives better. I mean, that Senegalese
interesting.
politician I interviewed, she was making lives better. And who doesn't want to do that?
So, many years ago, I had President Clinton at one of my conferences. This is that he had just gotten back from North Korea. He had helped secure the release of, I think, a couple of Americans that were erroneously in North Korea. And I asked him on stage, I said, "So have you done better things for the world as an ex-president, or did you do more for the world as a president?" And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Anthony, with a stroke of the pen, I had executive power where if we wanted to put malaria nets in Africa and it cost us $900 million to do that, I stroked a pen, and through USAID, we saved 3.6 million lives from malaria. The Clinton Foundation, I'd have to work for 50 years to raise $900 million. And so the point being is, if you have the power and you use it wisely, it is a force for joy and it is a force for good. So,
I love that story, Anthony.
you
And
know,
I wish all, the women who look at power and think it's too hard to get there, I have to make too many compromises, and I won't, I'll have to deal with kind of egos when I get there. I want them to hear that story, because we need more women at the top, and women need to realize that power can be an incredible source of
well,
satisfaction.
I love the book. The title of the book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women and Everyone. Katty Kay, thank you so much for joining me today on Open Book. I really enjoyed it.
Anthony, that was great. Thank you.